just to remind you, things to keep in mind as you are going through the facilitation. First of all, make sure that you understand that the intergroup dialogues are not about you, they're about the participants. So do not lose yourself in the dialogue. We have had a few facilitators in our past where they start arguing with students, or they start, they talk a lot, and they're participating in the dialogue now as participants. They've lost themselves. And it's easy to do that because once you get into the dialogue, it's like, wow, I've never participated in one of these things, and now this is great, I have an opportunity. That's not your role as a facilitator, so make sure you don't make it about you, it is about the participants. You can actually bring information to the dialogues. Just make sure that you make it, or you present the information in a way that doesn't seem like you are participating. So don't say, I just want to let you know that I am in favor of bilingual education. You don't say that, because as soon as you say that, the person in the group that is against bilingual education, you just shut them up. They're not going to say. So what you say, you give information in the way of a question. Okay, so we're talking about bilingual education. What do you say to people who believe that bilingual education is actually very, very effective, and they have research behind it, and what do you say to that, right? Well, you just gave your opinion that there's research behind bilingual education and that it's viable and all this other stuff, but you did it in the form of a question so that the people are taking it as such, as opposed to he just gave his opinion and he's a facilitator, he's in a position of power, so I gotta watch what I have to say. So
instead, the way you introduced our topic today, because I am kind of like in the logistics, is we're gonna, I remember you were saying, we're gonna talk about race relations in the United States today. You just kind of announced the topic.
Yep.
Is that it? So we're gonna talk about bilingual education in American schools. That's how you would introduce the topic?
Well, first of all, the dialogue itself, and the title of the dialogue will introduce the topic.
Oh, okay.
So if the topic for the 6 weeks is race in America, which covers so many different dimensions, you've already covered that.
Oh, I didn't realize that's what you were referring to, because I've seen other models where maybe with the University of Michigan model, which is much longer, they'll take different topics
Yes.
for the 16 weeks.
Right. No, what you're going to do is if the topic for the dialogue for the 6 weeks is race in America.
Okay.
Today we're going to talk about Black Lives Matters. Today we're going to talk about immigration. Today we're going to talk about, so you can go ahead and throw that out, right? Also, it depends on what they said in the evaluations.
Right.
So that will guide that.
Okay.
And then, yes.
And to that point, also at one point I heard you give a contrast. On one side of the
Yes.
issue, I think it was the wall maybe
Right.
the immigration issue.
Yes.
On the one side, there are people who believe we need to build a wall.
Yeah.
And on the other end of the spectrum, there are folks who overboard it. Do you create a contrast to give people a sense of, and then there's ideas in the middle. Let me hear what your thoughts are about that.
You can do it in so many different ways. I like to do it that way, as opposed to, let's talk today about Black Lives Matters. What do you think? I mean, that, it needs more clarity, right? So you have to really phrase your questions in a way that participants are going to understand, well, what are you asking me? So I like to do that. Let's talk about Black Lives Matters and the different opinions that sort of surround that. So for example, you have this and you have that. Now, you just got to make sure your question doesn't go on for 5 minutes. We did have a facilitator 2 years ago at the University of Arizona. I went in and substituted for another facilitator, and there was a graduate student, and his question went on for like 5 minutes. And then when he asked the question, there was silence because nobody, well, what is your question? Right? So I had to actually interrupt them, several times. You just got to make sure that you're judicious about that. And I noticed that somebody, I think, asked me, could you ask the question again? That was great, because that means that you didn't understand it. Chances are somebody else also didn't understand it. And also, it's an opportunity for people to catch their breath and think about these issues. So that's fair. So it's important to also think about, don't just ask the question one way. Ask the question, and if nobody responds, then ask the same question, but ask it from a different perspective. So what I'm really asking is this, let me say it a different way, and then you ask a question. And all that time, people are thinking about it, and then it gives them time to actually respond to that. Do not play out your issues in the dialogue, you know? So be aware of your hot button issues. Like immigration is a hot button issue for me. I was running a dialogue at the University of South Dakota. We had a fishbowl that day, and the fishbowl was, we had Native Americans, African Americans, and Latino students who were not part of the dialogue came in for one day for a fishbowl. Because we wanted to get that interaction with, they didn't have enough diversity in the group, so we wanted to get that interaction. So the students of color were in the middle. They talk among themselves, and then you move them out, and then the people that are listening to them, they go inside the fishbowl. You have a discussion with them, and you all break them into one huge circle, and then you have a dialogue about what happened, right? Well, one student, a white student, after we said this is safe space, you can ask whatever you want to. His question was, I want to know, why is it that you came to America? He's asking Native Americans, African Americans, and Chicanos. And of course, when I heard that, the hair on the back of my neck went up, right? And I actually responded to him in a very snippy way, which was, I violated all rules of facilitation, right? And as soon as I said that, I told myself, oh my God. So what I did is that at the beginning of the following meeting, is I opened up by apologizing to him. Jim, I just want to say to you that last week you asked a very fair and legitimate question. We said it was safe space, and what happened is that I cut you off and I answered, and that violated rule number 3. For that, I apologize to you.
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
So I shared with Jesus in our planning for the implicit bias workshop that we did yesterday, that we had something similar happen when we did the implicit bias training a year and a half ago in the fall of 17. I was present in the room, but a colleague of mine shared that at the end of the session, there was a white male who said something along the lines of, you know, I just don't get it. You know, it just seems like this is all my fault, and I don't know what to do from here, or something along those lines. And unfortunately, it touched the nerve of the then facilitator, who, rather than using it as a teachable moment, kind of shut him down and basically said, you're the problem. Well, we don't want to do that, right? Because we want to invite in as much diversity in our circle as we can. So, Jesus, it's helpful for you to sort of point out your humanity in these settings, because we can all potentially be triggered. If someone said something really anti-Semitic, it's going to be hard for me not to respond, but I think how you ended up responding to him, and I guess that the point is, even if the question is offensive to us as facilitators, we still need to legitimize the space for the question to be asked and let the others in the group respond.
Yes. Yes.
How did people respond, or did they not because you kind of shut them down?
Well, you could tell everybody else realized that I had actually done that, right? The other participants, the other students are aware of that.
Okay.
So I think they all appreciated that I apologized to them,
Okay.
and that I was, as a facilitator, vulnerable. So the students appreciate that, as opposed to trying to cover it up, and I never said anything. They're gonna be mad about that. So you do want to have an element of humility about that, and you want to model for the students also. That was modeling for them. But the point is, that's a hot button issue for me, and so you want to be aware of those things. Now, when students actually also, or participants, make comments like that's anti-Semitic, or is anti-affirmative or action or whatever that sort of triggers you, you can also try to catch your breath. This is why you have a co-facilitator, and then follow up with questions. Okay, so you just said that all whites are racist. So let's take a look at that comment. And let's get a little clarification. When you say all whites are racist, do you mean like 100% of whites are racist, or would you say 60%, or is it 30%, 40%? I mean, you know, what do you think? And then, and you open it up to the discussion to everybody else, right? And sometimes the student will say, well, I think it's more like 60%. Okay, now we're getting into the nuances of, you said 100, now we're at 60. And then other student will jump in and say, no, I think, and then you get into a discussion of whether we're moving ahead, we're moving behind. I mean, it opens up all kinds of things. Again, you want to be able to ask good questions from that. Yes.
So when he came back the following week and you apologized to him, then did you allow that question of his or his response to be discussed?
Well, what I did is I also said, first, let me be very clear with you. I want to apologize to you for doing that. That was unfair. Now, let me have a discussion with you about why I reacted that way. And then I told a little bit about my own story, that Mexican Americans were born in the U.S. and a lot of times were accused of not being in the U.S. Right? Particularly Native American. You tell Native American, why did you move to this country? It's quite problematic. And the student actually said, okay, I understand now that maybe I should have asked the question in a different way. I just didn't know, which is really great. We were having an honest discussion about that. So, I mean, there are no yes or no sort of responses to this, or right or wrong. As facilitators, everything that I'm telling you, you're going to bring in your own experiences and your own knowledge. Some of you may have counseling backgrounds, and you're going to try different kinds of things. And that's okay. I'm just trying to give you like a structure of how to handle some of these things, but feel free to bring in your own flavor to it. I'm just saying that don't lose yourself in the dialogue, I guess. But
Just one quick thing for this thought, that when the group convenes and starts to dialogue, that maybe one of the things to practice and expose are some of our triggers.
When
And how
we
to
come
cool
together.
down when we
Yeah.
come together,
That's a
and
good
so
idea.
we just kind of start cooling things down in advance.
yeah, there you go. Right.
I think one thing that you can, one of the things that I see in facilitating, is as a facilitator, you open yourself up to some liability in some of this stuff, right, some of these topics. And I think some things can get lost in translation or not picked up in the meeting, right? So like, when, we were talking about making America great, and like your interpretation of it was completely another perspective that,
Yeah.
so like my perspective on something like that, you may not be able to capture it. You may step into something or open something up that opens yourself up for a lot of liability. So how do you know what's right and wrong in this instance?
Well, there's no right or wrong. There's just perspective, and there's validation of perspective, right? So we were having a dialogue, and that actually came up, because in fact, I saw that just 2 days ago at the University of Arizona. They were having this open forum, and an individual from Lebanon came in, and he said, I came from this country where bombs were falling, terrible, and you have no idea. And he was talking to DACA students and other Chicano and folks that were born here, right? You have no idea how you have it made in America and how you should obey the law, right? Well, that's perspective. And so somebody actually came and clarified, does the fact that somebody had a really bad experience necessarily invalidate your experience? And of course, they basically said no. That wasn't a dialogue. That was an open forum that was all over the place, right? But in a dialogue, you would try to actually have discussions for clarification around that. So this is what I'm saying. Questions are very, very, asking good questions and following up and opportunities to clarify it's great. Sometimes you're going to miss those opportunities. Other times you're going to catch them and say, okay, so I hear two perspectives here. One is a very legitimate perspective that I never thought about that has to do with communist China and somebody coming over here. On the other hand, does that mean that your experiences of growing up in this country are not really legitimate because you didn't have that experience, right? Can we talk about that? And then you have that discussion there. Where it would be problematic if we say, well, you're wrong, because that's China, man. We're not in China anymore. That would be inappropriate to actually do that. Or to tell you that you need to listen to her because you're right, we got to make here. That's not dialogue.
You can say something like, I work with high schoolers, and like, high schoolers, they can take things sideways really quick on you, you know, like, if they don't have the comprehension where you're going with something like that, they can really, you know, put it in the mud really quick, and it's
Yeah.
like, so you gotta be really conscientious of this, sometimes that capacity is not within you, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes.
No, the reason why I have that perspective, oftentimes I like to bring up, because I feel like before we go into that discussion, we probably should acknowledge the fact that we should be grateful for even having this kind of discussion.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because I see that it's not possible in a lot of other places in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm not bringing communist China here, but I can see the Americans' greatness is allowing these possible, and make it possible for Black people to advance, and over time, we are making progress. And instead of just, you know, round them up and put them in concentration camp, or just kill them all and stuff like that, that will never happen in this country.
But
So
if we,
it's self-correction, the system is self-correction.
But you see
It's a
how
great system.
you sharing that in the group will actually make me think about something that I never thought about. Like, for example, this idea of being grateful, when you say that, it's like, I never thought about that in some countries, and we're not able to have a dialogue because,
That's right.
you know, so I think that perspective is very, very important, right? As well as the perspective of US-born Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, and their experience that they have in this sort of context. But that experience does not invalidate yours, but it informs that perspective as well as the other perspective informs your perspective, that there are different contexts.
Right, I'm not invalidating what they're saying. It just, yeah.
Right,
As
right.
I said, when
Yeah.
we go in this discussion, maybe with some sense of gratitude, right? We
Yeah.
are even able to do that.
Mhm.
I
Yes,
took it like, I really should be more appreciative of what I have here right now, you know, like to think, yeah, I should appreciate this freedom, which I do, because I travel a lot,
Yeah.
you know, I mean.
As a
but to
parent, yeah, as a
appreciate,
parent, we are struggling with our children about that. They were born and raised in America. They didn't see my perspective. Oftentimes, they were pointing out all these social injustice as a colored children. And we wish to remind them, you know what you have here is mighty good. You know.
Yes.
This- You know, we're dealing with kind of a hot button topic here.
Yeah.
What liabilities do you open yourself up to? I mean, championing the cause of this, you are liable to file a call on your own torch. And, you know, I mean, am I gonna end up on the news? Am I gonna end up blacklisted? You know, I mean, like, what are some of the things that we're opening yourselves up to here?
Okay, just so that I understand your question is the dialogue gonna blow up and then it's gonna make the news? And then you're gonna be in the news, is that what you're talking about? Nowadays, I'm glad you brought that up. You have to be very, very careful because Breitbart, Judicial Watch, these conservative groups have plans on college campuses that are looking for liberal types of activities. They might consider this a liberal activity. They will report it and they will distort it and you'll end up in the national news. That happened to me as a diversity officer at the University of Arizona. Breitbart picked up some guidelines that I was actually asking faculty to not follow, not a requirement, but just suggested guidelines on how to have dialogue in a classroom, and they distorted it about how this was a requirement for faculty, blah, 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 blah. So I did make the national news. So, in terms of those dialogues, you want to walk before you run, right? And you want to prepare your facilitators for having these kinds of discussions. But ultimately, we live in a political world, and it's getting much more political. But that's not a reason to not a good enough reason to not have these dialogues. But you just want to be careful about that. Yes.
I guess if I could kind of respond to something that I heard in that too. I'm thinking that part of that is we need to be very clear that I don't think we're trying to champion any particular cause. What we're trying to do is have a dialogue so that we can learn about and explore the richness of the various perspectives and have better understanding. raising a particular cause.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry, I guess I misunderstood the question. You were asking whether we will get into trouble when we are championing the.
Well, no, I mean, our cause here is to speak about diversity and have these dialogues, and these dialogues could end up shooting us in the foot. I mean, that's what we're looking for here, right?
It's about reaching higher levels of understanding through different perspectives.
Yeah.
So that Miami University of Ohio, I went and helped them start the program, and in all the descriptions, I had them put in the purpose of this dialogue is to maximize free speech, and we want to hear conservative, middle of the ground, and liberal voices. Because Breitbart will pick it up if you don't put that in there, and they will say it's a liberal program, and they're trying to indoctrinate people to be a bunch of liberal, which is.
So you said higher levels of understanding, and then what was the other thing you said after that?
To reach higher levels of
Free
understanding.
speech.
Free speech, no discussion.
Maximizing freedom of expression
Okay.
and reaching higher levels of these, and it depends on all kinds of voices in order for us to achieve that.
Social network.
Okay, so let me say a little bit more, okay, quickly.
One quick question, do we have to worry about that we might be put on a social network or, certain excerpts, and make it,
You're not allowed to film in the classroom.
I know.
Right, and
Well,
so
then that's-
that would take care of that, and I think we have to remember that than any other we are a democratic academic institution, so we have potentially activities going on every day that, if you think about it theoretically, any of us could end up on the news. This came up a little bit, for those who might have attended the Race and Social Justice event, which attracted more than 500 in the fall, there was some concern among our subcommittee members. So we did a couple of things. We contacted a liberal kind of watchdog, community-based organization. We spoke to campus police. Nobody knew that campus police was around in plain clothes because there was a concern of a committee member that apparently there's a white supremacist organization that resides not too far from the college. Who knew? And fortunately, we had more than 500 people in the Marcy, and it went off without a hitch. But I think there is, I think it will be prudent. We will want to be prudent in how we proceed because as Jesus was saying, we want to, for all of us involved, continue to raise awareness so that we change behavior. Because all of these things are ultimately tied to either our EEO plan or to closing equity gaps across the college.
Okay, let me very quickly, because I'm running out of time, say a few other things is, you can actually bring in material to actually stimulate the discussion. YouTube is really, really great for this. There's a lot of really nice short videos, like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, on implicit bias or microaggressions, that you can show the video and then have a dialogue around that to get the discussion actually going. What's not appropriate is an hour-and-a-half movie like Color of Fear. You don't want to bring that because now you're not having a dialogue. You're watching a movie and then you're out of time. You can bring in guest speakers, for example. We brought in the elder for at the University of South Dakota to talk about Native American issues. But you just want to make sure you prepare those speakers to say, we want you to say no more than 10 minutes worth of comments and then open it up for discussion. If they end up speaking for an hour, they're delivering a lecture now.
Yeah.
That's not a dialogue. So if you are going to bring in guest speakers to get it at a topic that you're not familiar with, then that's okay. Just make sure that they are not speaking the whole time, but they're allowing students to actually do that. These are not therapy groups. You need to be very clear about this. These are not therapy groups, so you should not be getting into family dynamics. What did your mom say to you when you're growing up? Those are therapy groups. Already there's a lot of tension around intergroup issues, let alone if you start talking about interpersonal sorts of things. So, and if the students start to go in that direction, just stop it and say, we're not going to talk about that. Once in a while, you have somebody that wants to talk about LGBTIQ sexual practices. No, so sorry, but we're not here to talk about that. Or some other inappropriate topic. You want to cut that out and make sure that they don't go let me see what I have, quickly in terms of these things. Basically, these dialogues are needed because, interaction between groups does not happen on its own. You have to structure it, you have to give incentives, you have to actually come in and, work that. And you know what the intergroup dialogues are, they're small, face-to-face discussions with different groups, working through their issues led by trained facilitators. The dialogues have to be sustained. A one-shot brown bag luncheon is important, but that's not sustained. 6 weeks is sustained. The equal status contact is you have two facilitators. Hopefully, if it's a race in America, you have a white facilitator and a Latino facilitator or an African American facilitator representing two different groups. That's equal status contact. Facilitated, bi-directional. Particularly with the Native American white dialogues that we run on campus, is that students are so hungry, white students are so hungry to learn about Native Americans that they inundate them with questions. But the Native Americans don't ask the white students questions. So it has to be a bi-directional process so that the Native American students have to ask questions of the white students. So for the white students, when they're asked the question, what does it mean to be white? For them, it's the first time they've been asked that. And that Native Americans do have questions about white people. You just gotta get them to ask that. So it's, if it's about educating whites only, that it's not an equal status contact situation. You gotta be learning about each other.
Would it be good to maybe, like if you're doing it in the class, have the topic out and have them maybe write a couple of questions before they even come into the dialogue?
That's great. That's a great technique. I like that. In fact, sometimes we assign homework, quote unquote, for the dialogues. At the end when you're closing. So for next week, what I'd like for you to do is that as you're going to Walmart, as you're going to class, as you're talking to, see if you can notice things that we talked about today and how they play out. And then next week, we're going to ask you to report back. So you first open up with that, and somebody said, yeah, I was at Walmart and I saw this interaction. Or my mom said this to me and I thought that was wrong. Right? So they start reporting back things. So you can actually do some of that. We've experimented with story circles. I think I talked a little bit about that. Theater dialogues. You have theater and then you have a dialogue. You have skits and a dialogue. Music dialogues. You bring in you get yourself a CD player, and then the students bring in songs that actually mean something to them from an interview perspective. They play the song and then they talk about it and then you have dialogue. Also art, you go into a gallery, you look at the art that's out there and then you have a dialogue on there. So many different ways that you can actually do this. Here's some of the combinations that we have actually toyed around with in the past. The NECHA, Hispanic Greeks at Arizona State University, there was a lot of tension between these two groups over a stupid incident that happened the years before. And I happen to actually won that. But after 6 weeks of talking to each other, they were able to put their differences apart, and in fact they ended up collaborating. Athlete, non-athlete, we've done those, and then we've done Asian American, white. They're not all up here, but you can do so many different combinations though.
Jesus, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I heard you mention this yesterday and then you mentioned it again today, this notion of incentives. What did you mean, incentives to participate?
Yes, pizza, credit, certificates,
Okay.
those kinds of things. I don't think I have to talk about the Voices of Discovery, because I think you already know that it's,
Yeah.
And then we talked already about the purpose of the dialogues, and these, I'm gonna leave these slides with Lisa, so you can actually get those. Or this is in, and I'll talk about this, so let's go ahead and move on. I was gonna do some interactive exercises with you, but I'm running out of time. The cultural walk, I think you're familiar with the privilege walk.
We have 15 minutes.
Oh, we do? Okay. Well, I'll describe the cultural walk, right? And the cultural walk is basically you stand everybody